Well, here we are in chapter 3, moving right along. So far, we have argued for the importance of studying organizational behavior and why and how it can be important for a business and specifically for you and your career. We've also discussed how values and attitudes impact organizational behavior. In chapter 3, we turned our attention to individual differences and how they impact organizational behavior. We have stated specifically and in general several times in this class that organizations are made up of individuals and organizational behavior directly emanates from the behaviors of those groups and those individuals. As you might guess, all of the individuals are different. We see the world differently. We interpret our environment and situations differently. And we have different experiences, different talents, and many different perspectives. We are different in many, many ways. No surprises there. But understanding those differences and how they may lead to relative behaviors helps us manage and direct the differences towards mutual success. And after all, isn't that what we're all after? Obviously, the individual differences are many, and we can't possibly cover all individual differences that may arise, so the text discusses the differences that are relative to the workplace and organizations. Once again, this discussion has great applicability to your private life and can greatly enhance your ability to work with others and apply the proper management and leadership tools to the appropriate situation. This last statement underlines the point that since people are different, we must treat them differently. We as leaders must recognize and understand the differences and change our behavior accordingly. In management circles, you often hear that you must treat people and employees equally and treat people the same. I disagree. And in the initial part of this lecture, I'll make my argument. You may agree or disagree, but it will certainly make for an interesting discussion on the discussion forum for this week. So let's explore the differences and how those individual differences impact organizational behavior. Well, welcome to chapter 3. Individual differences and emotions. How does who I am affect my performance? Why and how am I different from you? Why do I do what I do, and why do you do what you do? Well, the simple and obvious answer is that I'm right and you're wrong. If you would just see things and do things as I do, the world would be a much better place. All who agree say aye. Well, the silence is deafening. I've tried for 45 years to convince my wife of that. Anyone want to venture a guess how that came out? Seriously, being different is not about being right or wrong. It's about being different, and we should be able to accept those differences within the limitations of values and ethics. Our differences strengthen us. That's why I believe our discussion forum is important. It gives us a mechanism to display our differences and understand those foreign perspectives. Notice on the discussion forum that I rarely say you're wrong. I may say I disagree, or I may present an opposing view, but it doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're different. The trick is recognizing and understanding those differences and then knowing when to apply them. That's the doing part, if we recall from chapter 1, effectively and efficiently to affect successful organizational behavior. Do those terms sound familiar from previous chapters? The text discusses the differences in broad categories such as intelligence, personality, etc. And that's good. There are just too many specific categories to discuss reasonably. The text also divides these categories into relatively fixed and relatively flexible. They follow with the assertion that leaders and managers had more influence on the flexible differences and little influence on the fixed differences. But suffice it to say that leaders and managers do have influence over significant individual differences in the workplace. And those individual differences render significant impact on the behavioral outcomes of the organization. Translation: those differences create or impede success. Now, this might lead you to believe that these IDs, or individual differences, are obstacles to success and something that should be overcome. I can't begin to tell you how many managers I've encountered that believed that they had the answers and their job was to change all employees to agree specifically with their solution and approach. Not only is that a fool's journey, but it's probably impossible. Individual differences are not obstacles, they are tools. There are many different screwdrivers, wrenches, hammers, and pliers in our toolbox, and they all have uses to address challenges in different situations. We don't change them all to look alike. We use them in the appropriate situation and save them until the next appropriate situation arises. These differences have value. Such are the individual differences in an organization. Let me give you an example. I worked in an organization that was being challenged by outside competitors and the general decline of the marketplace. Our product was used extensively in the construction industry, and that industry was experiencing a steep decline. Therefore, although we were well established and had a good customer base, we were losing business. As customers struggled financially, they were looking for cheaper and more efficient alternatives, and our customer base was shrinking as we lost some to alternative products and to more effective sales pitches by competitors. And to make things worse, we were not acquiring new customers at any appreciable numbers. It was not a comfortable situation. Naturally, we looked at our sales force for answers. Our salespeople were experienced, hardworking, but just not bringing in new business. Therefore, although our customer loss was moderate, it was significant since we had no new customers to replace those we lost. We met with our salespeople and discussed the situation and their sales approach. They continued to assert that they were working hard and just weren't able to land new customers. Finally, a very astute executive, not me, made a profound observation. He stated, salespeople are different. Maybe we just have the wrong kind of salesperson seeking new business. He further explained that there are roughly two kinds of salespeople, hunters and nurturers. Hunters are aggressive, self-assured, accept rejection well, and won't take no for an answer. Nurturers are personable, supportive, customer-oriented, and build personal relationships with current customers. Hunters are great at gaining new customers, but become less effective at retaining and enhancing the customer accounts. Nurturers have difficulty obtaining new customers, but are great at retaining established customer accounts. It was his belief that we had mostly nurturers and very few hunters. We were asking our nurturers to be hunters, and all of the additional training and rewards we could muster would not turn them into hunters. There were individual differences that made them hunters or nurturers, and we had little control over those traits. We needed both, but we couldn't make one into the other. And when we analyzed our sales force, we found he was right. Individuals' differences matter to outcomes of the organization. But first, one must recognize those differences and understand how they interact to create the desired outcomes. And this example leads us to another discussion, not covered in the text, that warrants consideration in managing differences. Once we recognize the differences, we must take action, that's the doing part again, to highlight and utilize those differences for the good of the organization. In business, we try to ensure good behavior repeats, and we often do this by providing incentives. In the case of salespeople, we set up sales compensation plans based on business volume, revenues generated, etc. And we tend to set up the same plans for everyone. There is an underlying management premise that we must treat people equally, and that is translated into treating them the same. It is my contention that this premise is flawed. We should not treat people equally if equally means treating the people the same. People are different, and we should treat them differently. Should we reward hunters the same as nurturers? If we treat them the same in terms of reward programs, will we optimize their differences? If we set up our sales incentive program to highly reward repeat business revenue, will we likely gain a significant number of new customers? If we set up our sales incentive program to highly reward new business generated, will we likely be effective in maintaining our old clients? We must treat people differently because they are different. Is there a possibility of unfair treatment perception? Well, of course there is. Some may perceive unfair treatment and others will not. That too is because of individual differences. But I believe that most employees, family members, neighbors, etc., don't want to be treated the same as everyone else. People recognize differences and like to celebrate those differences in themselves and in others. The following example is one I have used in other classes, so if you've had me before, you may have already heard this. However, it is still relevant for illustrating the effectiveness of treating people differently. When I worked at Nestle, I had an employee, I'll call John, who was a bad employee. He had major attendance problems, consistently exhibited a bad attitude, and was generally a negative influence on the organization. He came to my office one day and asked to have Friday off so he could visit a relative out of town and utilize a long weekend. We were allowed to have 2 people off the production line at one time, and only one other person had asked off, so his being gone would not cause significant harm to the production schedule. I denied his request, stating the numerous problems he had with his behavior and his poor attendance record. He was not happy, but grudgingly accepted my decision. A little later in the day, another employee from the same production line as John asked for the same Friday off for a similar reason. Her attendance was outstanding, and her performance was outstanding in every way. I granted her request. I'm sure you can guess what happened next. John flew into my office complaining about unfair treatment and demanding he get the day off since he asked first. He claimed that the situations were the same and I was treating people differently. I agreed that I was treating people differently, but the situation was not the same. I explained that she was an outstanding employee and he was not. She had an excellent attendance record and he had a terrible attendance record. If he had the same record and displayed the same work attitude as her, he would get the day off as well. I denied his request again. I treated them differently because they were different. The interesting part of this example came later. After the shift ended, a few employees from John's line stopped by my office and thanked me for treating the young lady differently than John. They too recognized the differences and appreciated the fact that the company did not treat all employees equal, and in this case, equal to bad employees. They appreciated the fact that differences were recognized. Do they treat people differently on athletic teams? Do they treat people differently in the military? Do they treat people differently in our churches? You bet they do. Why do we feel that we have to treat people exactly the same in business? Now, people are different, and I believe we should treat them so. However, we should take care to ensure that we are not treating people differently for factors that are irrelevant to performance or contribution, or factors over which they have no control, such as race, sex, religion, etc. That goes without saying. The text delves into differences such as intelligence. Some people are just smarter than others. Believe me, there have been an abundance of people in my life who are smarter than me. But the trick is to recognize the level of intelligence and ensure that we utilize available intelligence to the greatest advantage to the employee and to the organization. The text identifies the types of intelligence and states that the implication is that one-size-fits-all training programs fall short when diversity of intelligence is taken into consideration. How we apply our intelligence and how we learn is another difference apparent in the workplace. Some of us learn and express our intelligence verbally, some visually, some read better than watch, etc. That is why this class is designed with the text providing the base of learning and is supplemented by written lecture, video lecture, PowerPoint slides, and open discussion forum. You should be able to find a way to learn and express yourself in these various learning structures. Our workplace must provide multiple avenues to learn and express ourselves and multiple avenues to express and utilize the various intelligences within the organization. People are different. Another example of differences deals with experience. We all do not have the same level of experience in life, in work, parenting, marriage, or anything else. As strange as it sounds, we often disregard different experience levels and try to treat people the same according to a plan. Let me give you an example. When I was in the consulting business, I conducted a basic supervision program that was designed to train new supervisors, generally up to 1 year of experience, on the skills necessary to be an effective supervisor. Many of these classes included new supervisors from different companies. In one such session, I asked everyone in the class, probably 20 people, to introduce themselves and name their company and their experience level. As he went around the room, I heard 6 months, 3 months, 7 months, and finally 20 years. To my surprise, I had one supervisor with 20 years experience in attendance. I asked him how he managed to get into this session, and he dryly responded, "I evidently made someone mad, and this is my punishment. I'm not looking forward to it." After a few more minutes, I took a break and asked him if we could talk. I explained, "Look, I don't know how you got here or why someone decided to punish you, but I'd be angry if I had to sit through this too. However, my job is to train these new supervisors. I think if you and I work together, we can do a great job of helping these new people in their careers. And I promise you that I will treat you like someone with 20 years of experience, and I only ask that you help me train the people. Not only will we both enjoy it, but we both will learn a lot." I quickly modified the lesson plan and included him as a resource rather than a student. After the session, he approached me and said this was the most positive and enjoyable training program that he had ever attended. He thanked me for a great experience. The other students also commented on how valuable it was to hear from two experienced people. Treating everyone the same just because protocol called for such would have missed a great opportunity. People are different. Throw out the rules and treat them as such. The text then engages in a lengthy discussion of personality. It's a good discussion, and one containing a wealth of insight and information. Again, I won't rehash that here. On page 85, the authors deal with the concept of the ideal employee personality. As we study the various traits that make up IDs, and specifically personality, it is tempting to try to build an ideal personality type for our organization. Once again, this is a fool's journey. What is the ideal personality for the Carolina Panthers? I'm sure the Steeler or Patriot fans answered loser, not funny. Doesn't it really depend on the position of the player? Do you think that the predominant personality of a lineman is different than a quarterback or a kicker? Probably so. There is not an ideal employee personality. The authors state on page 85, good management involves taking the time to get to know each employee's unique combination of personality traits, abilities, and potential, and then creating a productive and satisfying person-job fit. In other words, a contingency approach to managing people is best. Recall that discussion about contingency management in Chapter 1. The discussion on core self-evaluations, CSEs, represents something you can directly apply to yourself. As you read through this section, you should honestly evaluate to yourself your position on self-efficacy, self-esteem, locus of control, and emotional stability. I mention this because I believe it is critical that you develop the ability to analyze yourself. I and the text have repeatedly stated that it is important for you to understand the differences, strengths, and weaknesses of people in the organization. But it is equally important that you have the ability to do so for yourself. The best person to improve you is you. And to do that, you must have a reality check as to what makes up you. For example, I have a moderate to high level of self-efficacy. I'm generally confident that I can meet most challenges and be successful. There are times, however, when my confidence to accomplish a task is compromised, and I must recognize those situations and find a way to overcome those feelings. I also have relatively high self-esteem. I believe I have value. My locus of control is largely internal, and that I am in control of the events that affect my life. I rarely blame situations on outside factors. And finally, I believe my emotional stability is average. I'm not overly worried or concerned, and generally keep negative emotions under control. With that realization, I can analyze these components and determine what type of jobs and organizations are the best fit for me, and how I may engage in developmental activities for self-improvement. Also, if I know and can analyze myself, I become more adept at analyzing the CSEs of others. Finally, the text discusses emotions. We all have them, and they impact our behavior and reactions to people and situations. I believe that because of the people in them, some organizations are more emotional than others. Some organizations seem to approach business crisis situations with calm workmanship and are able to analyze the situations and react almost routinely. Other organizations are quite emotional and respond well to hype and hyperbole. Some organizations are quiet and studious, and some are quite emotional and loud. Some quietly think, and some shout and act. I know it may sound strange to equate organizations to people traits, but organizations are made up of people, and leadership plays a great role in determining the disposition of the group. Look at commercials on TV depicting organizations. Some are flamboyant and some are logical. Should your emotional disposition be congruent with that of the organization in which you work? It's an interesting thought. Now, this chapter holds a tremendous amount of information for you personally, as well as about organizations in which you work or may work in the future. It is well worth the time you invest in studying. Chapter 4 continues to discuss differences in terms of diversity and also discusses the very interesting topic, in my opinion, of perception.